That looks like a good group of people there. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So hello, my name is Chad Carlson. I'm from the developer relations team at platform.sh. And today I wanted to talk to you all about Blackfire and adding application performance monitoring, and then specific to this talk, profiling to your Drupal development pipeline. At Platform.sh, I work for the developer relations team. And so as we are a platform as a service at platform.sh that can deploy all kinds of applications, I've had to familiarize myself a lot more with Drupal than I had ever been exposed to before starting this job a few years ago. And our company has a ton of Drupal background and a lot of Drupal expertise amongst the people who work here. And so, hey, Tama, it's been a lot of learning over people's shoulders. And hopefully what I can attempt to get across today is how Blackfire actually aids in one part, not just in the development life cycle of your application, but also in giving you some better understanding of the inner workings of your apps. And so that it can help somebody like me who might be onboarding into a Drupal app, that they're have a lot of onboarding and learning that they have to do in order to really start contributing, so that each part of their contributions can really be focused on improving performance with each pull request they make on your application. And so it's been very helpful for me as I've become more familiar with Blackfire to learn more and more about Drupal. So thank you very much for coming. And we are going to start with the Unreachable Slides presentation. Bear with me, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I think, as I mentioned here, I am from platform.sh. If you aren't familiar with our platform, we are a platform as a service provider. And that means that we take care of all of the infrastructure configuration and operations, the DevOps that would go into you developing your Drupal application. So if I have a typical upstream Drupal app, and I want to not only figure out where I want to deploy that application, but how I'm going to start making changes in testing environments, in staging environments that my developers can actually contribute to. I need a way to be able to do that, obviously. And what Platform does is it tries to simplify the abstraction level in which you actually build and deploy your apps, and then has a lot of built-in features around how environments are generated and infrastructure is provisioned for each of the developmental changes that your team makes. So you can see here, I'm looking at our management console for the application I'm going to be talking about today, which is a normal Drupal 8 application, in this case that's been installed with the Umami installation profile. If I take a look quickly at our code base, we'll see that the ability for Platform to understand what's going on in this code base and actually deploy it takes place in 3 files. An application YAML that allows me to define which version of PHP that I want inside my project, and then also, since we're going to inherit this file, every environment that we create subsequently after that for a pull request or a proper branch. And then it'll allow me to define which version of PHP that I want here. And this is a feature that you'll see across all of the configuration files. When we define a cluster of containers that describes our infrastructure, we can actually define it declaratively inside these files. So I here have PHP 7.4. I don't have to worry about a patch version, because this is another thing that we do. We do manage service updates in the background. We can just define this minor version, and we'll get PHP 7.4 each time in the app container. I can define relationships to other containers, in this case, my MySQL database and Redis, and then define a build and deploy strategy that would be repeated across each of my environments. That allows me to sync up to this external GitHub repository, and each time this pull request I'm going to talk about today it'll create an isolated environment specific to the changes that I make here that is going to be filled with its own generated URL. It's going to have every piece of the infrastructure we previously defined included inside of it, and it's going to include all of the data. So in this case, it has inherited all of the data that's been initialized in that installation profile, and I'll even be able to log into my admin dashboard and test user accounts inside this isolated environment to test every bit of what I have changed. Okay, this is a lot of platform. What does this have to do with Blackfire? Very recently, we actually joined with Blackfire.io, which is an application performance monitoring and profiling tool, such that each of our platform environments come pre-installed with Blackfire included in it. You'll see here I have an extension here in my browser that allows me to directly profile this. Well, it's not working right now, live demos. It allows me to directly profile this application as it's running at this generated URL. How it sort of works is that we have the Blackfire backend and two pieces that are the ones that come pre-installed on a platform project, the probe and the agent, that gives us, for PHP or Python, some introspection into each function that is running inside our application so that we can take really detailed measurements about how much resources that each of those calls are making, so that we can make incremental adjustments to the performance of our application over time, and actually open pull requests that make directed improvements each time that we do that. And as I'll show here, we can actually use definitions to block certain pull requests that don't fit the criteria for performance that we want to maintain across changes and new features that we apply to our Drupal site. Configuring Blackfire on platform is pretty simple. If I go to the original project, I'm able to define a set of environment variables that actually provides credentials to an environment I have set aside to take these profiles of the application. Some tokens, IDs, which allows me to have access to my profile. So this is what is taken by clicking this extension, if it was working during my live demo, of my live production site on master. And you'll notice some things. It's going to give me the time that it's taking to load, IO weight, CPU, the peak memory of our application, network, and it also includes some additional information about HTTP and SQL queries that are taking place in my app. And from this dashboard, I get a lot of interesting information. If I switch the view to functions, I can actually see, okay, which are the calls that are taking the most amount of time. So I can start here in my main function and run init. Obviously, this is 100% of my time. But if I go down, I can continue down these flows and get called out pieces of this call graph that'll say how much time is spent in the boot call of the Drupal kernel, or getting definition for my caching, handling PHP Redis. And so we'll see here that, okay, this one function is using 17% of the total time that any request is taking. I can switch over into memory and make some of the same things. It's taking 55% of the total memory used in my application here. And this gives you a lot of power so that you can really dive down deep into someone, like I said, like myself, who isn't necessarily familiar with every single piece of what's going on in Drupal, and get a better understanding of what happens when somebody tells me that my site is slow. Blackfire is the kind of tool that's going to give you an idea of why it's slow, where it's slow, and then the other additional component is how to fix it. So because there are a lot of framework and language experts at Blackfire that put this dashboard together, this call graph, or an accompanying timeline view of what's going on in our application, comes with this recommendation tab. And so for somebody like me, this is tremendously helpful because it's going to say, okay, there are a set of PHP ini and basic caching and preloading settings that aren't included in this case, is our base Drupal 8 template at Platform SH. So if I'm in charge of maintaining this so other customers can deploy it on platform and see if it were a good solution for deploying it, it'd be a good idea for me to set people up as best as possible for best performance with this template. I mean, this doesn't even touch the case where I might be a new developer on a team where I'm really trying to improve some application. So if we look here, I can go display errors should be disabled. And in Blackfire, I actually get a really detailed set of recommendations pulled from their documentation of exactly what the problem is here. So I can say that this is something that's recommended to be disabled in production. So in order to improve performance, I can add to my ini file this display errors off key. And just from that, I'll be able to make an incremental improvement to my application. We'll get into this test in a moment. But as you can see, what I can do to sort of approach this application is go one by one through each of these and make those tiny adjustments to the my application based off these recommendations and see a real marked improvement in my performance of my app. So if I go to the pull request where I'm making those changes, you'll see me playing with Blackfire here. Apologies. Actually, at Platform, we're able to set a lot of these ini settings inside of a set of variables that are set aside for PHP. So we'll see that my display errors definition that was in that recommendation is actually here in these set of variables. And I can make a profile of those changes that I just made. And it's not going to necessarily be clear right off the back of what difference I made here, but you'll see that there's few more recommendations available as I made those changes. And what I'm actually able to do is take the initial profile that I applied to the production site and compare it to what I've done in this isolated pull request environment. And so through the dashboard, I can make that comparison and actually see that what I'm doing is I'm comparing PR1 versus my production environment, and I've seen a marked increase or a marked decrease in the time it takes for some requests, the I/O wait time, and the CPU resources of a major factor just by changing those PHP ini settings. And I can continue to view my call graph. I can view the timeline. If I had more queries, I'd be able to do the same. And this allows me a really powerful tool, not just to actually contribute to the application, but it can become part of my pipeline so that I can say, as I open a pull request and add any new feature to my application, so long as within a certain % difference, I/O wait time hasn't increased, or more importantly, the time hasn't increased by some drastic percentage, then this pull request has passed this stage of the pipeline. You know, we have stages of our pipeline set aside specifically for running our unit tests or even doing visual regression testing. And then the continuous delivery part of something like Platform SH that gives us these isolated environments. But Blackfire actually provides that additional piece of insight to say, here's what's going on in my application, and here is why it's not performing up to the level that I would like it to. So let's set aside a separate environment specifically to narrow down a specific call inside my application and see what we can do to better manage how memory is handled in the request there. So this has support not just for Drupal, but for things like Django. And I know recently we do demos that are based off of Django and Symfony, where you'll find pieces of people's applications where they're, for example, making a call some 100 to 500 times when they really could be doing it once. And you'll be able to pull that out of this call graph and see we're using a tremendous amount of memory in a particular node. And when we go back into our editor, we can actually drill down into that call to see that's the place where we need to focus our attention and actually be able to find that mistake in the first place. So that's the comparison aspect of our pipeline. But the other important part is we are able to, the other half of this recommendations is that they come with assertions. So all of our configuration for Blackfire occurs in this Blackfire YAML file. And so from here, I can actually take those recommendations after I apply them and do something super simple, like make sure that nobody turns off this display errors aspect of my ini file. And if somebody does, it'll actually fail that part of the pipeline, and we can prevent that from being merged until that's re-enabled. We can do things like the main wall time of our home page should be fast. If anybody introduces a new feature that exceeds this 250 millisecond limit, the build will fail. In this case, this profile is used to create what's called a build by running each of these tests. And so it will apply each of these assertions. And like I said, should this be exceeded or any of these other recommendations we're enforcing not be held, then the build will fail. In order to give us a better interpretation about what's going on in our code and what's going on with each new feature being added. It also allows us to define in part of our builds a set of scenarios. So in this case, I can actually pull from variables defined inside my Blackfire environments a test user inside my Umami installation and make sure not just that all of these recommendations that I've pulled out just at this outset are enforced and not overridden or exceeded any of those limits, but I can say, I want to make sure that I get the status codes that I expect in each of these paths of my Drupal site right off the bat. So I can include a lot of deployed tests on our Drupal application to make sure I'm getting the status codes that I expect for each user that I expect using a DOM crawler provided by Symfony that actually will go through each of these paths and make sure I'm getting the statuses that I expect, I'm getting the initialized content that I expect. It gives you a lot of flexibility to run scenarios for either anonymous or authenticated visitors as a part of every piece of your build that's included in your pipeline. And that's just a quick overview of Blackfire. I really didn't have a whole lot of time to get into the monitoring aspect. And again, I apologize for some not very fun technical difficulties that started this early morning for me. But I hope that that did give you a picture of how, in combination between Blackfire and Platform SH, you get the continuous delivery and profiling aspects to really get some introspection to what's going on in your code when you make these incremental changes. It gives you the power to have new people onboarding, make real contributions to the performance of your application, and place restrictions on what performance changes are sort of disallowed when new features are introduced into your code base. Thank you all for joining. My colleagues Jerome and Tamar are going to be at our booth to have a sort of discussion around probably more the monitoring aspect of it, but Blackfire and Platform in general. And I hope that you will all join us. Thank you very, very much for your time, and have a great DrupalCon.
Hey everyone, I'm joining Chad to answer the different questions in the Q&A tab. And thanks, Chad, for this very nice presentation. So first, Stefan Schler, how you would recommend to crawl an amount of live articles from an imported DB for such Blackfireio profiling? Well, using Blackfire Player, I guess, I mean, with automation, just like Chad was showing. Well, I'm assuming this is the question. You can define this within your scenario file that Chad showed up. Because you can crawl. It's using Blackfire Player, which is an HTTP client and crawler, which is open source, and you can use it from your side. I mean, on your computer or in your pipeline, and also from Blackfire directly, configuring periodic builds, for instance. So you can definitely define scenarios like this by clicking on this or that element, this link, and then submitting, just like Chad showed for the authentication form. So you can do this this is quite straightforward. It's just a bit of work to define your scenarios, depending on how complex it can be. Another approach would be to enable Blackboard Monitoring, which is out of the context of this talk. But Blackfire Monitoring will, once it's enabled, it will record each and every request coming from your through the PHP engine for your application. Just like it's an APM, so it does work like other APMs, but it's tightly coupled with Blackfire profiling, and will trigger profiles from real end user traffic for the topmost transactions, topmost pages that are really impactful for your users. So that's one of another approach. Visual regression testing, no, unfortunately, no. It's not possible yet, because it's Blackfire Player is a pure HTTP client, at least for now. We have an idea to integrate with like Chrome driver, for instance, but for now it's not possible. Another question by Federico Prato. Would it be possible to get Blackfire to work on AWS environment? Yes, definitely. It's even working on Amazon Lambdas using Bref framework. It's definitely possible. It's just a PHP extension associated with Blackfire agent, which is a running daemon. I think there is an AMI available. Yeah, there is an AMI available from the contributed by the community for the agent itself. Another question. Let's say PHP 7.5 will come out tomorrow. Is it possible to create a dev environment with that version so that I can test that my site works as expected? I think this is a question for you, Chad.
To my knowledge, PHP 7.5 is not one of our supported image. So as I showed, when you set up your app YAML file, you wouldn't be able to quite yet put PHP 7.5 into an environment and test it. But your build hook is completely configurable to you. So if you could get creative and install that newest version of PHP there as part of your build hook, then you would at least be able to start testing until we released it.
Thanks, Chad. Another question from Andrew. Actually, it was the first one. Is Blackfireio included for existing platform message customers? I think this is a really good question, and that needs some clarifying. At the moment, if you have a platform message environment, or hosting environment, it's not directly included in the pricing. It does require an additional subscription. As for enterprise and elite projects, this is something that you need to discuss with the assigned salesperson to get it included. But for the regular on-demand hosting, this is not included. You can easily configure it, but you need a subscription to make it work. Last question from Oriole Bell. Which are the main features for going with Blackfire instead of New Relic? This is an excellent question. Well, it really depends on what you want to do, because now Blackfire is also a monitoring tool. So what Chad showed to you, demoed to you, is a profiling system. It's the profiler and the performance tester. So this is not available in your Relic, or very, very limited. You cannot go that deep with New Relic for profiling. As for monitoring, then you would have similar approach to what New Relic would give you, and you won't have everything that New Relic supports. So it really depends on what you want to cover. But the real addition there from New Relic to full Blackfire using monitoring is that with Blackfire monitoring, you would have a profiling, monitoring, and performance testing tightly coupled with, like, for example, you identify a transaction from your Drupal application. You would be able to trigger directly from the monitoring a profile from real end user traffic, and also automated profiling, like I said, once a day for the 10 topmost transactions. Maybe Thomas, you want to add something about this?
Please, no.
Okay.
Cut me off guard. No.
Right. So with Blackfireio monitoring, it would be possible, for example, to crawl over a sitemap.xml to generate profile data during your pipeline. No, not exactly. Blackfire monitoring is passive. It means that it's just records all the requests coming in from your real traffic. What you're mentioning is related to your question, Stefan, I guess, is all about the scenarios within your pipeline. Then you cannot use a sitemap for this, or maybe you can extract URLs from your sitemap with a Blackfire scenario. I think this is definitely possible, and then roll out different steps using these these different URLs. This is possible, yes.
Yeah, maybe.
But this, yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe a good point to explain the difference between monitoring and synthetic monitoring, because I guess the question of Stefan refers to like a nice way to bootstrap synthetic monitoring.
Yeah, indeed. So synthetic monitoring is exactly what Chad showed with a scenario. So it's not real traffic, it's coming from a robot. and you can here, yes, your approach is right. Extract these URLs from the sitemap and then loop over these URLs that you would have extracted to run the different steps. And for each step, you would have one profile. To identify possible bottlenecks from rendering content with new change features. So I guess this is the follow-up of your question. So I hope we answered correctly.
Yeah, I truly believe that to identify bottlenecks very easily, like just simple monitoring, just watch your applications live, and if you push something, you will see regression. You will see some transaction going in the wrong direction, so you will know like you introduce a regression there.
Yeah.
So no need to hack the system, just plug in the monitoring and the bottlenecks. That's the great part, maybe the sad part. The bottlenecks will come to you. You will see all the bottlenecks, and maybe at first like too many bottlenecks, but it's better to see them than to hide them.
All right. So thank you all for your questions. We'll be around at the Blackfire booth during the day, especially in a few minutes during lunchtime, and also this afternoon. During the different breaks. So feel free to join us, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.